Oh, color theory. We love it, we hate it. But today we're going to dive into mixing complementary colors, why we would do that, and how to create the best shadows. So I'm using my Letter Sparrow primary paint palette and also this Baohong cold press watercolor paper. So let's get started. Complementary colors are across from each other on the color wheel, so we are going to start by outlining our color wheel. I prefer the yellow, magenta, cyan color theory. You can use whatever color theory you prefer, and I have a more detailed video about this mixing process on my channel. But essentially, I'm taking these three colors and I'm mixing them together in various amounts to get all of the colors around the color wheel. So for example, here I'm mixing majority of cyan with a tiny bit of magenta to get a beautiful, beautiful blue. And then the purple is more of a 50-50 mixture between the cyan and magenta. So the whole time I'm painting today, I am only using three colors, yellow, magenta, and cyan, to mix all of the colors that you'll see. So this is our color wheel. Now, the primary colors become yellow, magenta, and cyan. And then the secondary colors are green, purple, and red because, yes, yellow and magenta does make red. So the colors across from the color wheel are pretty obvious once you've got a appropriately spaced color wheel. And those are the colors we are going to mix together today to see how they react as complementary color mixes. We are going to start with yellow and purple as our first complementary pair. So I've got yellow at the top, purple at the bottom, and the three squares are to add water to see how diluted they can get and light. So when you see that throughout this whole entire video, it won't be, I'm not going to show every part of the dilution process. But essentially, we're going to add a tiny bit of purple to yellow to get this deep yellow mix, and a tiny bit of yellow to purple to get the deep purple mixture. And then the center square is our even mixture. It's 50%. It is very gray. And I'm going to show you why we're even mixing the complementary colors. So I've taken yellow and I'm adding a shadow color that has a little bit of purple mixed in, and we're creating a very natural looking shadow. Now, I decide to finish the rest of that idea off at the end of the video, so you'll have to wait to see how that ends up. But now we have orange and blue. Orange and blue as a complementary color pair, and we're going to add a tiny bit of blue to our orange to get a very deep muted orange, a tiny bit of orange to our blue to get a very deep muted blue, and then the mixture in the middle is more of a gray black color at the 50% mix. The next combo is red and cyan, and red leans a little bit orange, which is why it is paired very nicely with cyan because orange and blue are complementary colors. And then the same thing, we add a tiny bit of blue to get the deep red and a tiny bit of red to get the deep blue. And then in the center, we have our very gray mixture. So again, why are we creating this? It's because these complementary mixes are creating more natural shadows. If you have an object that is blue and you need a shadow, it is better to add the complementary mix of blue than to add black, for example. It will just look a lot more natural if you have a very nicely muted blue. Here we have our red magenta and this beautiful green that's kind of close to viridian, and we are mixing them together to get the same thing, a deeper version of the red purple and a deeper version of that green blue. The next one is magenta and green. So magenta and green, very classic pairing that I like to use a lot to mute my colors, because if you add just a little bit of magenta to green, you get a very natural earthy green. And if you add just a little bit of that green to the magenta, you get a beautiful deep purpley red. And then of course that nice neutral color right down the middle. And then our last pairing is the violet. So it's the magenta blue mixture, and then that really bright lime green. Mixing those together will get you that same result, a nice deep muted violet and a nice deep muted green with a very neutral 50-50 mix. So I'm going to show you the difference between creating some of these colors with these complementary mixes as shadows, and also what it looks like with a black shadow. So I did the yellow before. Now here is the cyan. Red is the complementary color to cyan. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of red into the cyan to get a nice gradual shadow color that goes from the cyan down into the shadow. Place a little shadow next to this little circular thing we have going here, but you can see the shadows are just really nice and natural. Same with magenta and green. I added a little magenta blob, mixed a tiny bit of green into my magenta mixture, and then tapped that shadow in while everything was still wet. So the shadows look great, and you can see why I use a complementary color to create the shadow, but let's compare it to a black shadow, because when we're beginning with watercolor, sometimes we think we need to add gray or black to create the shadow because we don't know about mixing complementary colors to get that nice gradual shadow. So here I am placing the same colored dots and tapping in shadow when it's still wet, but I'm using black. I'm using lamp black. And you can see there's a nice, beautiful contrast, but it's really dark. There's not a whole lot of gradual variation, and so it doesn't look very natural. Whereas the shadows above, the color mixes to create the shadows had those base colors in them, so it looks really natural and gradual and like it was on purpose, like it's an actual shadow. It's the color of the base color, but a little bit muted, a little bit more shadowed. So here I thought I would paint a green bell pepper, and I'm going to go full in for that bright, beautiful green so we can contrast, adding a bit of magenta in for the shadow. So I paint the bell pepper, and then I'm going in with a tiny bit of magenta into my green mixture, and I'm going to start tapping in the shadow while everything is still wet. And you can see the contrast really clearly where the shadow lines start to form, and it is a grayish black color, but because it is still predominantly green, it looks really natural, and we can see more depth and color variation within the shadows instead of it just being a dark gray blob or a dark line. Then using that same color, I create the shadow that is coming off of the bell pepper. You can mix up different variations of yellow and cyan to make the green, adding in a little bit of magenta to darken it and make it moodier, and then tap that into your shadow to create more depth. And then I'm also going to paint the side of the bell pepper, the right side of the bell pepper, with some of that dark shadow color as well, because we've established our light source is coming from the left, so everything on the right needs to be a little bit more shadowed. And that concludes our study on complementary color mixes. I really enjoy mixing complementary colors to create shadows. I just think they are way more aesthetically pleasing and natural, and I hope you try this out. I'll see you all next time. Bye.